President Cyril Ramaphosa and business leaders have come together again to tackle the country's challenges. Now, they've joined forces to deal with the economic crisis and also some of the contributing factors like Eskom, rail, crime and corruption. And the meeting, which took place last week, comes after business raised concerns that the country risks becoming a failed state. The meeting concluded with business agreeing to work with government to tackle these challenges. And to discuss some of this further, we joined virtually by Chairperson of the Business for SA Steering Committee, Martin Kingston. Martin, thanks so much for speaking to us here on Morning Live. Welcome.
Morning to you and to your viewers.
So in recent weeks, business leaders have become more vocal, it would seem, in their criticism of how the South African government has managed the economy over the past 5 years, and also fired warning shots that South Africa risks becoming a failed state. So what did business mean by that?
Well, I actually think that the circumstances are slightly different. Many business leaders in their annual reports have made it clear that the viability of their businesses are being threatened by a number of factors, including the energy crisis, the issues around transport and logistics, and of course the pervasive issue of crime and corruption. We'd raised that with the President actually at the beginning of last year. We'd had a meeting. We'd spent much of last year exploring these issues as well as exploring the broader considerations around the social compact. And at the beginning of this year, we started to get real traction, bringing in CEOs across a number of companies, representing many sectors of the economy, to focus on the three areas that I've talked about, as I said: energy, transport and logistics, and crime and corruption. We think they're all binding constraints on the economy being able to achieve its real potential, let alone being able to create a conducive environment for sustainable employment. And what happened last week was a stock take, effectively, with the President to agree on governance and oversight structures, to specifically focus on the particular interventions that we've agreed with government we're going to work on, and to commit to putting not only our resources behind that, working alongside government in partnership, but also reporting back to the President every.
So let's talk about those interventions. Sorry, Martin, just got a bit quiet there, so I think we're having a slight connectivity issue there. But if you can hear me...
and having structures which progress.
Okay, my apologies. Martin, my apologies to you as well. Seemingly just a slight glitch there with the connectivity. But let's just pick that up again in terms of some of the interventions that you discussed. What were those?
Well, if we look at energy, for example, we all recognize that the biggest single issue that's confronting us is load shedding. We've committed to working alongside government on seeing whether we can actually address that and relieve all load shedding by the end of next year, 2024. We think that's technically possible if we work hand in glove with government, exactly as we did during the COVID pandemic when B4SA was formed, including, of course, the design, development and implementation of the vaccination rollout program. We think that was a very successful partnership. It can only happen if we bring our resources, our skills and our expertise to bear, and we're all committed to doing so. The same thing with rail and ports, where the dysfunctionality around rail and ports is having a very real impact on many exporters and indeed importers in the country. And lastly, as I said, crime and corruption, where we think that it's possible to capacitate the MPA to fast-track cases both in the public and the private sector, to lift confidence levels and to demonstrate that as a country we're actually beginning to address these very fundamental challenges, as I said, to sustainable economic recovery.
So let's pick one from what you've said in terms of capacitating the NPA, for example. How would business suggest that works?
Well, I think the first point I need to emphasize is that we're not in any way going to encroach upon the responsibility or indeed the sovereignty of the state. All of these areas are ultimately the responsibility of the state. But we do think that we've got skills, expertise and capacity that can be made available, technical skills in particular. We're already doing that in energy with the mobilization fund, the resource mobilization fund, where we're making technical skills available to the National Energy Crisis Committee on an arm's length basis, provided that we're completely transparent, very mindful of conflicts of interest. we see no reason why we shouldn't be able to harness resources and, as I said, capabilities within the private sector and make them available on an arm's length basis to the government, including, of course, to the MPA, which we know is at the absolute front line of prosecuting crime and corruption.
And speaking of crime and corruption, we go back to the Zondo Commission as an example, Martin. And I think what is very well known, reported upon, documented, is corruption within the public sector. But if we look at the private sector as an example and what came out of the Zondo Commission, that final report, what has business done? Quite apart from government and state institutions, to actually address some of what was raised, the concerns that were raised in that Zondo Commission report?
Sakina, you're absolutely right. My own view, and I believe it's the view of business more broadly, is that business is just as culpable as the public sector, where it hasn't had the systems, the processes, the governance structures, oversight in place. And any people who are perpetrators of maladministration, malfeasance, crime or corruption need to be prosecuted, need to face the full arm of the law, regardless of whether they're in the public or the private sector. And I believe a number of institutions have acknowledged that they had failings and have taken steps to reform those failings. But if there are individuals who have broken the law, they must be prosecuted. And we've been consistently clear about that, as I said, regardless of from where they hail.
Would it be fair to say at this point that business is rather anxious about the operating conditions in the country, Martin?
Yeah, we are very anxious about it. It's fair to say that we are facing enormous headwinds, not just in energy, in logistics, crime and corruption. And in all of those areas, as I said, special committees are being formed by government to tackle them, aided and assisted obviously by business, but in other areas as well. We may have to revise the agenda, such as water, such as other forms of municipal infrastructure, again, where I think it's possible to release very significant resource to assist government. But in the meanwhile, we're seeing an economy that is teetering on the edge of a recession. We narrowly avoided a recession. We've not got the necessary growth to be able to ensure that we are including all social players, both in the economy, but also addressing the very challenging problem of consistent unemployment, particularly amongst our youth. And that's not a tenable situation, not for business, not for the country at large. And all of our stakeholders, whether it be employees, whether it be communities, boards, or indeed shareholders, are concerned about this, and anxiety levels are increasing. All the more reason to pull together as quickly as possible, as I said, as we found that we could do when confronted with the challenge of COVID-19.
So to that point, what would you say as business is low-hanging fruit at the moment? What is something, or maybe 2 or 3 issues that business can assist government to tackle in the immediate term so as to try and bring about some change?
Well, for example, in energy, the Minister of Electricity has really announced that we will be making available specialist expertise engineers to go into 4 power stations to increase their energy availability factor, reducing demand. That's something that business can do both directly and by supporting the communications campaign, addressing operational inefficiencies, particularly for bulk transport within Transnet, both the rail and the port. We've got the skills to do that. Addressing crime and corruption, including, by the way, infrastructure theft. We've committed to work with government to see how we can reduce that. And then finally, fast-tracking prosecutions, including, as you say, within the private sector. I think those are all low-hanging fruit, and it's necessary to radically increase hope, but we only increase hope by demonstrating that we're getting runs on the board. And I suppose what I need to emphasize is that we are absolutely committed to transparent, regular communication about everything that we're doing, oversight, as I said, with government. Ultimately, government is chairing the committees that I referred to, so that we can account to society at large as to the progress that we're making and where we're not making progress, to explain why and to take the necessary remedial steps.
Do you find that government is actually receptive to the ideas that you put on the table, but are they also receptive to actually implementing those ideas? Is it not just a case of, oh, we are around the table, we're having a meeting right now, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, we think we'll do it, but ultimately 2 years down the line, we're still having the same conversation, Martin?
Until such time, Sakina, as we put in place the right sort of structures, as I said, those are now in place, such as the National Energy Crisis Committee. We've launched, or government has launched, the National Logistics Crisis Committee. We don't actually have the mechanism to make sure that we're overseeing the work that needs to be done. As you say, this is not about meetings, this is about work. The meeting with the President was really a stock take of how much progress is being made. There are 10 work streams in NECOM. We're participating in approximately 6 of them, already providing the requisite support. I think that, as I said before, if we've got a very focused approach, we only
Well, our apologies there. A bandwidth problem there in that connection to Martin Kingston. But of course, we're monitoring it. And as soon as he's back with us, we'll put him back on. And we're talking about the meeting that was held with business by government and looking at finding some solutions to some of the problems that we see. And of course, in everybody's interest to find a way forward, given some of the challenges that we face in our society. High unemployment, increase in poverty and inequality levels at the very least, and how this also plays out and expresses itself through high levels of crime and corruption in our society as well. So these are some of the issues that we are discussing. And of course, out of that meeting that business had with government, there was also the issue of illicit trade, which was raised as one of the biggest threats to stability and economic growth in South Africa. I believe we have Martin back. Martin, if you can hear me, let's pick up on that point, about illicit trade, because this, of course, is a serious problem for everybody in South Africa and its knock-on effects. So what is business's position on that matter, and just how serious is it?
No, it's extremely serious, exacerbated, of course, illicit trade during COVID. We saw that both in the alcohol industry and indeed more specifically in the tobacco industry. And once it shifts, it becomes entrenched. Government forfeits tax revenue. Actually, employment levels go down. It's very difficult to recover from that. We've seen a rise not just in illicit trade, but obviously in organized crime as well. It's a matter of extreme concern, not just to business, but it should be, and it is, to society at large. And once again, it's an area of particular focus of the joint initiative to fight crime and corruption, where once again, we're not claiming to be crime fighters, we're claiming to have skills, capabilities, expertise, and of course, a strong vested interest in seeing a fundamental reduction in the level of crime. And that, of course, includes illicit trade. But it takes systems and processes to ensure that we can actually address this in a very fundamental way, as urgently as possible.
And then I also thought this was interesting, Martin, as we are touching on some of the key issues that were discussed. The NHI Bill, National Health Insurance Bill, which of course will aim to ensure universal access to quality healthcare for all South Africans. Now, business's position on this, and did I understand it correctly that you say that it would leave all South Africans worse off and that it would potentially be catastrophic? Did I understand that correctly?
Well, business has made representations very directly and very recently to government on the issue of the NHI bill. We're concerned about affordability, we're concerned about systems and governance, and we're concerned about the fact that we need to actually bring more people into the net without alienating existing providers and existing consumers. We need to be very cautious about not rushing forward when we haven't assessed and analyzed all of the considerations concerned, because if we don't do so, we run the risk of very significant unintended consequences. All of that has been brought to the attention of the administration. We continue to engage with them on it accordingly. We can only put in place processes that have been properly thought through, that address all of the fundamental issues, and where we have the fiscal capacity to be able to actually pay for the commitments that we're making as a country. All of those are concerns we've raised, as I said, with the authorities.
And they are, of course, very interesting discussion points for South Africans as a whole, and it's going to be interesting to see how government actually deals with this. And you also raised your voice around international perceptions of South Africa and South Africa's government's position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is, of course, part of the reason the rand tumbled in recent weeks. Are you satisfied with government's reasoning and the position that was given to business?
Well, again, those issues have been brought directly to the attention of government by organised business, in this particular case by Business Unity South Africa and Business Leadership South Africa. My own view is that they are very attentive to that. They're well aware of the ramifications of not being able to navigate these broader geopolitical considerations very carefully, given the fact that we have significant trading partners around the world, not only but also in the United States and indeed in Europe, who are watching this space very carefully. We need to be able to motivate and explain our position, as I know government has sought to do, in a manner that allays any particular perception, either of bias or where we could undermine those existing relationships, or indeed run the risk of secondary sanctions, which would have very significant ramifications for companies from those countries investing in or indeed trading with South Africa. All of those matters have been brought to the attention, again, of government, and I believe that they are applying their mind very clearly to how they can provide the requisite reassurance to such partners, both domestically but also internationally.
Well, Martin, that's where we're going to have to leave it this morning. But thank you so much for bringing us up to speed regarding that meeting. That was Chairperson of the Business for SA Steering Committee, Martin Kingston, speaking to us about the coming together with government of business to deal with some of the country's major challenges.